Hello and welcome back to part 5 of the Real Thomas A Edison, book number 1411 of the Little Blue Book series. I'm going to read you the table of contents because we are no longer reading about Thomas Edison. So the first story was the Real Thomas A Edison. The second story was the amazing Ignatius Donnelly. The third story is Deus Americanus, where we have left off. And the fourth story was Thoreau and Anarchist. Okay, and this is part 5, and we're going to continue where we left off in Deus Americanus. We're on page 44. Away with, as the saying goes, such a sportive remark, after guiding for 8 years the spiritual, moral, and physical destinies of his people. Life is always a comedy to the gods. And what has an Olympian to do except have a cooking good time? Deus Americanus was a being of sublime moral courage. Another trait that is almost uniquely American, and which is one of the reasons, no doubt, why the zeitgeist chose him as the living soul of these states. While he was reveling in his corking good time in the White House, he executed one of those sudden moralic coups that got him the name in some quarters as the spiritual Marshal Ney, the bravest of the brave. He invited Booker T. Washington to dine with him, and told the Associated Press so point blank, there were gasps and sputterings among us earth whiffets, especially among the whiffets of the Southland. A Negro on terms of equality with the greatest of the White House? Die! But the Deuce had resolved to go Lincoln one better. The latter had merely set the Negro free physically, but Deus Americanus had resolved to set him free socially and politically. Which he did, as is known of all men, for he followed up his recognition of Booker T. Washington by enforcing throughout the Southland the 14th and 15th Amendments of the Constitution. This being one of the celebrated 12 labors, I will not touch upon it further. If Lincoln was the great emancipator, then Deus was certainly the great necromancer. For in assuring the Negroes of the South during their lifetime and on to unborn posterities the right to vote, he accomplished one of the greatest moral and seemingly impossible victories in history. Deus Americanus had not a provincial soul. He was never a local god. He went forth, when the call came, onto all the world with the big American idea. He proclaimed it from the Sorbonne, from the pyramids on the banks of the Amazon, at the very doors of the Vatican, from the Tower of London on the Nile, and he fairly slapped it into the bank of that fellow Deuce, Kaiser Wilhelm II, at Potsdam, where he uttered that famous boast which terrified the world, with an army like that I could lick the world. Did he say I or you? N'importe. As a good American and a sound Deucian, I prefer to believe he said I. It sounds American. It is American, for we can lick the world by jingo. And was said of your messenger, handshaker of the ambassador to all the world, was our Deuce, and he was received wherever he went as Caesar Americanus, by vast mobs that shouted Viva and Prosit. Like all genius, like all beings destined for apotheoses, he knew as a youth that he was born for a purpose. The attractions are proportioned to the destinies, said Swedenborg. He first of all prepared himself for his secretly foretold Deucehood by strengthening his body and his will. All gods are perfect physically and have Almighty wills. He read in his dictionary of mythology. He was in his younger adolescent days a weakling, timid, almost sickly, by acts of fortitude and discipline, such as only the predestined dare undertake. He finally achieved, after many years, the title of Bawana Tombo, the Fat Man. All greatness in action is founded on the exclusion of some universal human quality. No man can act consciously and have a continuous sense of humor, for humor is the supreme critic, the supreme disintegrator, the supreme paralyzer of action. Deus Americanus, like Narcissus, Alexander the Great, Cromwell, and Napoleon, was totally devoid of a sense of humor. It was his pillar of strength. I wouldn't think so. Else he would not have undertaken the labor of drying up New York for one whole Sunday, when he was police commissioner, a labor which was so signally and admirably successful, and grows so great in the eye of fame, that Deuce Dry Sunday will no doubt in the calendars of posterity oust Easter Sunday as a day celebrating the rise of a regenerated New York from the hells of Swizzle. Of all the elements which have gone to making Deus Americanus the body, blood, and brain of our national innermost self, no small credit is due to the style of his many books. Nothing can be farther from literature, which among us is feminine for written, and there was, of course, nothing feminine in the Deuce. His collected logos is the American style, as plain as a pitching post, as devoid of metaphor as an income tax blank, as raw as the meat of pre-Promethean anthropology. I don't know where these people get these words. Indeed, as his enemies can vouch, did he not verbally eat him alive? He who would have branded in his pistol-shot prose Pan himself a nature fakir, F-A-K-I-R. If the latter had ever questioned the eye and ear of the great wilderness hunter, no American writer, Deuce or semi-Deuce, has ever given us such homegrown and root American epigrams. The good woman is the best of all good citizens. Deeds, not words, alone shall save us. Let us pray with our bodies for our soul's desire. This last is the one mystical flight in the prose of the Deuce, and is almost sapphic in its pagan grandeur. I believe in hard work and honest sport. I believe in the sane mind in a sane body. Our Deuce translated this from the mens sana in corpore sano of an obscure Roman reformer named Juvenal, and although he gives him no credit, gods have plenary rights in expropriation. The perfect translation of the difficult phrase proves the profound nature of his scholarship. Besides, the phrase achieved American validity only at the exact moment that Deus Americanus wrote "I believe" in front of it. These nations, Germany and Turkey, in this crisis stand for the reign of Moloch and Beelzebub on this earth. A churchless community is a community on the rapid downgrade. These are but a few of the epigrams from the vast treasure house of Sagmorian wisdom, which has already swept away forever the moral potshots of Epictetus, Confucius, Aurelius, Poor Richard, Oscar Wilde, and Gaudi. The style is the god, verily. But I do not ask transatlantic and cis-Atlantic mankind to take my word alone that he of whom I have written is the venerable soul and soul Deus Americanus. Here follows the proclamation from Pantheon of the Deuce on East 20th Street, New York City, where one may see the sacred relics and vestures of the American. I do not know who is the author of this sublime apotheosis of the greatest police commissioner New York ever had, but I do know that in it he has condensed the soul of Deus Americanus to wit. He was found faithful over a few things, and he was made ruler over many. He cut his own trail clean and straight, and millions followed him toward the light. He was frail. He made himself a tower of strength. He was timid. He made himself a lion of courage. He was a dreamer. He became one of the great doers of all time. Men put their trust in him. Women found a champion in him. Kings stood in awe of him. But children made him their playmate. He broke a nation's slumber with his cry, and it rose up. He touched the eyes of blind men with a flame that gave them vision. Souls became swords through him. Swords became servants of God. He was loyal to his country, and he exacted loyalty. He loved many lands, but he loved his own land best. He was terrible in battle, but tender to the weak, joyous and tireless, being free from self-pity, clean with a cleanliness that cleansed the air like a gale. His courtesy knew no wealth, no class. His friendship no creed or color or race. His courage stood every onslaught of savage beast and ruthless man, of loneliness, of victory, of defeat. His mind was eager, his heart was true, his body and spirit defiant of obstacles, ready to meet his might come. He fought injustice and tyranny, bore sorrow gallantly, loved all nature, bleak spaces and hardy companions, hazardous adventure and the zest of battle. Wherever he went he carried his own pack, and in the uttermost part of the earth he kept his conscience for the guide. America, behold your soul, behold your one Olympian double. And I still have no idea who Deus Americanus is. Apparently he was an American president that was at Potsdam. So that should narrow it down. Possibly Wilson? I don't know. Next story. Was Thoreau an anarchist? What a great American thought about the state. By C. Hartley Grattan. Americans don't like anarchists. They figure chiefly in the national demonology. To class Henry David Thoreau with them will seem to most Americans equivalent to blackening his reputation beyond redemption. Yet Tolstoy, in one of his essays, refers to Thoreau as an anarchist, and Prince Peter Kropotkin, in his famous article on anarchism in the 9th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, names William Lloyd Garrison, Emerson, and Thoreau as three American writers whose ideas are tinged with anarchism. Out of 100 Americans who think of Thoreau at all, probably not one thinks of him in this light. It is the usual procedure of those who write about Thoreau to ignore this aspect of his writing, or elaborately to deplore it. It is pleasanter to incorporate him in the national tradition as our greatest student of nature, as a vastly superior sort of John Burroughs. A typical reaction to Thoreau's social ideas is that of J. Brooks Atkinson in Henry Thoreau, the Cosmic Yankee. For the hostility and the jeering of civil disobedience, life without principle, and slavery in Massachusetts betokens nothing more admirable then want of sympathy and arid understanding, chilly condemnation of social government, the ex cathedra, snake in the grass, vituperation. Was he not pusillanimous, vindictive, and feline in his attack? Nearly all of Thoreau's political thoughts reveal the less worthy side of his character. Unworthy of the poet who sang of nature in Walden and recorded the mysteries of the Concord and Merrimack rivers in Chrysosthene style, but to follow the devil's example and quote scripture, Thoreau himself believed that he approaches the study of mankind with great advantages who is accustomed to the study of nature. Abandoning nature for a moment and applying his intense scrutiny to human institutions, Thoreau arrived at ideas that are definitely anarchistic in color. So did Elise Reckless and Prince Kropotkin, also close students of nature. To ignore this aspect of Thoreau's work is to ignore a vital part of the man. Furthermore, if the tone of his essays is objectionable to tender readers, he provided his own defense when he said, "Severe truth is expressed with some bitterness." Early American anarchists. The tradition of anarchism in America goes back to about 1850, but there is no evidence that Thoreau derived any of his principles from the writings of these precursors of the great period of American anarchism, 1885 to 1900. Nor is there much evidence that he knew anything about the writings of Proudhon, whose What is Property appeared in 1840. He may have, for all sorts of ideas, flew about New England in his day. Josiah Warren, the first American anarchist, published his Practicable Details of Equitable Commerce in New York in 1852, and True Civilization in Boston in 1863. Stephen Pearl Andrews published The Science of Society in 1851. These two, and William Green and Lysander Spooner, were all active during Thoreau's lifetime. Furthermore, they were individualist, anarchist, and consequently held ideas sympathetic to Thoreau. After his death, the tradition of anarchism was still strong enough in Boston to warrant the publication of a paper bluntly called The Anarchist. The later anarchists, including the Spies Parsons group of Chicago fame, were chiefly collective anarchists, the one great exception being the chief American anarchist of all time, Benjamin Tucker. The evidence for including Thoreau in this tradition is slight, if not non-existent. It is more probable that he approached to anarchism by the road of self-reliance, the doctrine which was central in his thinking. Prince Kropotkin defined anarchism as the name given to a principle or theory of life and conduct under which society is conceived without government, harmony in such a society being obtained not by submission to law or by obedience to any authority, but by free agreements concluded between the various groups, territorial and professional, freely constituted for the sake of production and consumption, as also for the satisfaction of the infinite variety of needs and aspirations of the civilized being. A non-anarchist writer, R.B. Taylor, in Hastings' Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics, defined it thus: Anarchy means the perfectly unfettered self-government of the individual, and as a result, the absence of any kind of external rule. It is the widest possible application of the doctrine of laissez-faire. Government, it declares, is something that human nature should not be asked to submit to. If men were but left to themselves, they would form themselves into a cooperative, producing groups which would live in perfect harmony with one another. Each individuality would have unlimited powers of expression, and the rigid molds would vanish into what at present human nature is forced with infinite hurt to itself. How far Thoreau got towards anarchism may be shown by studying his political essays, particularly on civil disobedience, with reference to these definitions. Wanted the state as small as possible. In defining his position toward the state, Thoreau assumes as granted the notion of social contract. He tells us that he was compelled to file the following document with the town clerk of Concord in consequence of his having to pay his church taxes when he had never formally joined the church. Know all men by these presents that I, Henry Thoreau, do not wish to be regarded as a member of any incorporated society which I have not joined. He was determined not to support any institution which he had not voluntarily joined. He included the state as one of the institutions which one may join or not join as one sees fit, and if he tactically for a time appeared as a member of the American state, it was always with the reservation that he could resign when he disapproved of its policies. He did resign when he disapproved of the Mexican War and the conduct of the slavery issue. The sum and substance of the matter is that Thoreau was willing to support the state when he thought it good, but not when he thought it bad. At all times he believed the state should be as unobtrusive as possible. Government is at best an expedient, but most governments are usually, and all governments are sometimes, inexpedient. Starting from the old saw, that government is best which governs least, he proceeded. Carried out, it finally amounts to this, which also I believe, that government is the best which governs not at all, and when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government they will have. But, as Thoreau recognized, men were not yet ready for any such utopia, and until they were some sort of government had to be devised. In evaluating the stopgap governments that appeared on the road to paradise, one should recognize that the effect of good government is to make life more valuable, of a bad government to make it less valuable. Naturally enough, holding the state in small esteem, he had little interest in politics. His interest in the slavery question was not political, but moral, for he thought that the existence of slavery under the American state made life less valuable. His reaction to Daniel Webster illustrates his point of view. He pointed out that Webster played the political game within the mechanism erected in his day. He judged everything by political expediency. In so confining himself, he limited his mental and moral horizon in a manner intolerable to a free man, thinking as Thoreau believed himself to be. Nevertheless, he justly observed, those things which now most engage the attention of men, as politics and the daily routine, are, in its true vital functions of human society, but should be unconsciously performed, like the corresponding functions of the physical body. They are infrahuman, a kind of vegetarian. And I think we'll stop there.